that she had suddenly turned her back to me, lost as I fortunately was in these thoughts, proved not quite hurtful enough to hinder the growing mutual respect between us. After I brought little Miles home, we grew even closer, despite my utter bewilderment and agitation, to subject such a child as now stood before me. To expulsion? No, I was prepared to call it monstrous. I was somewhat late for our meeting, and as he stood by the door of the inn to which the mail coach had brought him, waiting thoughtfully, I felt I saw him whole, from without and within, in all his freshness and radiance, in that life-giving fragrance of purity in which I had seen his sister from the very first minute. He was incredibly beautiful, and Mrs. Groose merely confirmed it. His appearance swept everything away, save for a passionate tenderness toward him. I was attached to the boy with all my heart, once and for all, for that divine quality I had never since met in any child, for that ineffable expression which spoke that in this world he knew only love. It was impossible to bear one's ill repute with greater gentleness and innocence, and when I returned with him to Bly, I felt perplexed, if not insulted, at the thought that the dreadful letter lay locked away in my room. As soon as I could exchange a word with Mrs. Groose, I told her plainly that it was outrageous and absurd. She understood at once. "You mean that cruel accusation?" "Yes, one cannot believe it for a minute." "My dear, just look at him." She smiled, as though I were the first to discover his charm. "I do nothing else but look." "Well, and what will you answer now, miss?" she added promptly. "To this letter?" I had already decided. "Nothing." "And to his uncle?" I stood my ground. "And to his uncle?" "Nothing." "And to the boy himself?" I surprised her. "I shall say nothing to him, either." She resolutely wiped her lips with her apron. "Then I shall stand by you. Together we shall manage." "Together we shall manage," I echoed fervently, extending my hand as if to seal our alliance. For a moment she held it in hers, then wiped her lips with her apron again. "You won't take offense, miss, if I allow myself to kiss me?" "No, I shall take no offense." I kissed the good woman, and, embracing like sisters, I felt even more outraged and steadfast in my resolution. At any rate, that is how it was then. In that time, so full of events that now, remembering how swiftly it passed, I understand how much art is required to clearly convey the escalating course of things. What I look back upon with wonder is the situation I acquiesced to. I had resolved to see it through together with my ally, and, it seems, fell under the sway of a charming delusion, believing that overcoming everything, even remotely connected to this difficult task, would not be so very hard. A great wave of pity and love lifted me to its crest. In my inexperience, confusion, and perhaps presumption, I considered it a simple matter to get along with a boy whose education for society had only just begun. I cannot even recall now what plans I made to finish the holidays and resume lessons. Indeed, it seemed to us all that in that wonderful summer he was to take lessons from me, but now I understand. For several weeks, it was I who took lessons. I learned something that had not been taught in my narrow, stifling former life. I learned to be joyful and even to bring joy to others, without thought for the morrow. For the first time, I knew what expanse, air, and freedom were, all the music of summer and all the mystery of nature. And besides, there was a reward, a sweet reward. Oh, it was a trap, unintentional yet cunning, a trap for my imagination, for my delicacy, perhaps for my vanity, for all that was most responsive and excitable in me. To put it simply, I forgot caution. The children gave so little trouble, They were extraordinarily gentle. At times, I would imagine, vaguely and disjointedly, how rough the future, for every future is rough, might break or harm them. They bloomed with health and happiness, and yet in my care were like two young grandees, two princes of the blood, who must be guarded and defended, and the only fitting place for them seemed something like a royal, truly romantic park or an extensive garden. Perhaps the chief charm was the quiet, the silence in which something ripens or steals near. The sudden change was like the spring of a beast. The first weeks felt long, often in the very finest weather. They granted me what I called my own hour. When the children had been sent to rest after lunch, I would allow myself a brief respite in solitude before finally withdrawing. Precious as my companions were to me, this hour I cherished most of all, especially when the daylight was already fading, or rather, day lingered and the last calls of birds sounded from the ancient trees in the rosy sky. Then I could walk the whole park, savoring the beauty and nobility of the estate with a sense of ownership that amused me. In those moments, it was a joy to feel calm and righteous, and also, of course, to think that by my modesty, good sense, and high tact I was giving pleasure, if he ever thought of it, to the man whose insistence I had yielded to. I was doing precisely what he had hoped for and asked, and that I was succeeding brought even more joy than I had expected. In short, I fancied myself a rather remarkable person and consoled myself with the thought that someday this would become more widely known. Well, I truly needed to be exceptional to withstand the exceptional thing that soon, for the first time, made itself known. It happened in the afternoon, right in the middle of my hour. The children were settled. I had gone out for my walk. During these wanderings, one thought was, since I now feared nothing, how charming it would be to meet someone, just as in an engaging storybook. This someone would appear at turn of the avenue, would stop and smile kindly. I asked for no more, only that he know, and the only way to be sure he knew was to see his smile and the soft light illuminating his fine face. It stood before me. I mean his face when on the first such occasion at the close of a long June day, I stood rooted to the spot at the edge of copse from which the house was visible. What stopped me, with a shock greater than any vision could justify, was the feeling that my fancy had instantly turned to reality. There he stood, but high up, beyond the lawn, at the very top of that tower where little Flora had taken me on my first morning after arrival. That tower was one of two square, clumsy, crenellated structures, distinguished for some reason as the new and the old, though to my eye they differed little. They stood at opposite ends of the house and architecturally seemed absurd, though this was partly redeemed by their separateness from the building and not excessive height. They belonged to a time that revived romance, already become a venerable past. I admired them, fantasized about them, for we could all to some degree partake of their grandeur, especially at dusk when the battlements looked so imposing. Yet it was not at such a height that a figure so often present in my thoughts ought to appear. This figure, as I recall, in the clear twilight, made the strongest impression on me, and I caught my breath twice. I was shocked by the realization of how my first impression had deceived me. The person my gaze had met was not the one I had wished to meet. Thus came to me the vision, the apparition, of which after so many years I can scarcely give a lively account. Any stranger encountered in a lonely place a young woman of my upbringing is expected to fear, and the figure that presented itself before me, within seconds I was sure of this, resembled none of my acquaintance, much less the image that had always hovered before me. I had not seen this man on Harley Street. I had seen him nowhere. Moreover, the place itself, most incredibly, precisely because of his appearance, instantly turned into a desert. As I write this now, the feeling of that minute returns in full force. For me, when I understood, and did I understand? Everything around seemed struck with death. As I write, I hear again that tense silence in which all evening sounds were drowned. The rooks had ceased cawing in the sky, and that benign hour had lost all voices. But there was no other change in nature, save perhaps that I saw everything with heightened acuity. Gold still spilled across the sky, the air was clear, and the man looking down at me over the battlements was as distinct as a picture in a frame. This is what flashed through my mind with extraordinary speed. Who he could be, and who, nonetheless, he was not. We stood facing each other for quite some time at a distance, long enough for me to ask myself who he was, and, failing to answer, to fall into astonishment, which only intensified a few seconds later. An important question, or one of many that arose later. How long did it all last? Think what you will, but my vision lasted while I racked my brains over a dozen possibilities of how to meet a person who lives in the same house, and perhaps has lived there long, of whom I knew nothing. It lasted while I felt the injury. It seemed to me my position demanded there be neither this ignorance nor this man. It continued all the while the stranger, and, as I recall, there was a strange liberty in his being hatless, pierced me with his gaze from his height in the waning daylight, with precisely the same questioning and probing expression his appearance inspired in me. We were too far to raise our voices, but had the distance been shorter, some call breaking the silence would have been the sure consequence of our direct and intent gaze. He stood at one corner of the platform, the farthest from the house, stood very erect, which struck me, with both hands on the parapet. Thus I saw him, as I see the letters on this page now. Then, exactly a minute later, he changed his place and slowly walked to the opposite corner, without taking his eyes off me. Yes, I was acutely aware that throughout this passage he never once looked away, and even now I see him moving his hand from one battlement to the next. He stood at the other corner, but not as long, and even when he turned, he still gazed at me as intently. He turned, and that is all I remember. I cannot say I was not expecting a continuation. I was riveted to the spot by deep shock. Could there be a hidden secret at Bly? Something akin to the mysteries of Udolpho, or a mad relative kept in confinement without alarming anyone? I cannot recall how long I pondered this, how long I remained at the meeting place with a mix of curiosity and dread. I only remember that when I returned to the house, it was already quite dark. Agitation, of course, possessed me during that interval and drove me onward, and I walked no less than 3 miles, circling that place. But later I was to receive an even greater blow, so this first alarm still caused a relatively human tremor. Indeed, the strangest thing about that tremor, strange like everything else, became clear to me upon encountering Mrs. Groose in the hall. That scene returns to me constantly. The impression of the white, paneled expanse, with portraits and a red carpet, brightly lit by lamps, and the kindly astonished look of my friend, which immediately told me she had been searching for me. I realized, with her simplicity, she had no inkling of the story I was about to tell. Until then, I had not known how much her dear face could hearten me, and, strangely enough, I grasped the full significance of what I had seen only when I decided not to tell her anything. Hardly anything else in this whole affair seems to me as strange as the fact that true fear began for me with the desire to spare my friend. And so, right there in the cozy hall, under her gaze, for a reason I could not have expressed then, I instantly rearranged myself inwardly, invented some pretext for my lateness, and, muttering something about the beauty of the evening, the heavy dew, and my damp feet, hurried to my room. There, it was quite different. There, for many long days, everything was so strange. Day after day, there were hours, or at least minutes snatched from the children's lessons, when I had to lock myself away to think it all over. It cannot be said that I was excessively nervous. Rather, I was terribly afraid my nerves would fail, for the truth I had to comprehend was undoubtedly the truth about my vision, about that stranger with whom I seemed to be inseparably and inexplicably linked. It took me very little time to understand how I should investigate this event, without questioning anyone, unnoticed by others, without stirring unease among the household. The shock I had experienced must have sharpened all my senses. Within 3 days, merely from closer attention, I knew for certain that the servants were not playing tricks on me and that I was not the victim of anyone's jest. Everyone around me knew something of which I had not the slightest suspicion. Only one sensible conclusion suggested itself. Someone had allowed themselves a rather crude intrusion. This is what I repeated each time, diving into my room and locking the door. We had altogether fallen victim to an unwelcome intrusion. Some presumptuous traveler, interested in old houses, had slipped into the park unnoticed, admired the view from the best spot, and made his exit the same way. If he looked at me with such a hard and brazen gaze, that was merely his audacity. In the end, it was well enough that we would probably never see him again. I admit this was not entirely correct, and I might have formed a more accurate judgment, but my most important concern was my enchanting work, and beside it nothing else mattered. My enchanting work was living with Miles and Flora, and nothing could endear it to me more than the possibility of losing myself in it, away from all trouble. The charm of my little charges was a constant joy, making me marvel each time at the futility of my initial fears and my aversion to the gray prose of my position. There seemed to be no gray prose, no dreary monotony, so how else could I call such work enchanting, appearing to me as everyday beauty? All of it was the romance of the nursery and the poetry of the schoolroom. Of course, I do not mean we only learned verses and fairy tales. I simply cannot otherwise express the kind of interest my pupils inspired in me. Could it be described any other way than by saying that instead of growing accustomed to them, which is no miracle for a governess, I call all my sisters as witnesses, I constantly made new discoveries. Yet there was undoubtedly one path where these investigations immediately ceased. Profound darkness still shrouded everything concerning the boy's behavior at school. As I noted, I quickly managed to regain my composure and face this mystery without pain. Perhaps it would be closer to the truth to say that he himself, without uttering a word, explained it, turning the whole accusation into absurdity. My conclusion blossomed a truly rosy hue, akin to Miles's innocence. The boy was too pure and bright for the vile world of school, and had paid the price for it. I pondered intensely how the weight of difference in character and superiority in position always rests with the majority, which includes dull, lowly schoolmasters, and how this majority is driven to cruel reprisal. Both children possessed a gentleness that, this was their sole flaw, though it did not make Miles a sluggard. How shall I put it? Gave them something impersonal and utterly unpunishable. They were like cherubs from a story whom, morally, at any rate, there was nothing to spank. I recall feeling, especially with Miles, as though he had no history at school. We do not expect a small child to have an eventful past, but in this delightful boy there was something extraordinarily tender and extraordinarily happy, as if born anew each day, which struck me more than in other children his age. He simply never suffered, not for a single second. I took this as direct refutation of the idea that he had truly been punished. Had he been so corrupted, it would have shown, and I would have stumbled upon some trace. But I noticed nothing, absolutely nothing, and consequently, he was a perfect angel. He never spoke of school, never mentioned any classmates or teachers, and I, for my part, was so outraged by their injustice that I never alluded to them. Of course, I was enchanted, and the most remarkable thing is that even then I was perfectly aware of it. Yet I succumbed to the spell. It soothed my torment, and that torment was not my only one. In those days, I received worrying news from home, where affairs were not going well. But what did that matter if I still had my children? I asked myself this in moments of solitude. The childish charm of my pupils blinded me. There was one Sunday, let me begin with this, when the rain fell with such force and for so many hours that there was no possibility of going to church. And so, as the day waned, I arranged with Mrs. Groose that if the weather improved by evening, we would go together to the late service. Fortunately, the rain ceased, and I prepared to walk out along the avenue through the park and by the good country road, which would take about 20 minutes. On my way down to meet my companion in the hall, I remembered the gloves that needed mending and had been darned, publicly and perhaps not very instructively, while I sat with the children at tea. An exception was made on Sundays, tea being served in the cold, tidy temple of marble and bronze that was the grown-ups' dining room. The gloves had been left there, and I went to fetch them. The day was rather gloomy, but the evening light still lingered, and this helped me not only to spot them immediately on a chair by the wide window, closed at that hour, but also to notice a man on the other side of the glass, looking directly into the room. One step into the dining room was enough. My gaze instantly took in everything at once. The face of the man peering into the room was the same. It was that same man who had appeared to me before. And here he was again. I will not say with greater clarity, for that was impossible, but very close, and this proximity marked a step forward in our intercourse and made me grow cold and catch my breath. He was the same, visible this time, as before, only from the waist up, for the window, though the dining room was on the ground floor, did not reach the floor of the terrace where he stood. His face was pressed to the glass, but this greater closeness only strangely recalled how vivid the first vision had been. He remained only a few seconds, but long enough for me to be sure. He too recognized me, and it was as if I had been looking at him for years and known him all my life. However, something happened now that had not happened before. Though he looked into my face through the glass and across the room, with the same intense, hard gaze, that gaze left me for an instant, and I could see it shift from object to object. Immediately, I was struck with certainty. He had not come here for me. He had come for someone else. This glimmer of knowledge, for it was knowledge amidst darkness and horror, had an extraordinary effect on me. It provoked a sudden surge of duty and courage. I speak of courage, for without a doubt, I grew extremely bold. I rushed out of the dining room to the front door, found myself in an instant on the path, raced across the terrace, rounded the corner, and scanned the avenue. Yet there was nothing to see. The stranger had vanished. I stopped, nearly falling, feeling genuine relief. I surveyed the scene, giving the ghost time to return. I call it time, but how long did it last? Today I cannot, in truth, speak of the duration of the whole event. A sense of proportion must have deserted me. It could not have lasted as long as it seemed then. The terrace, and all around it, the lawn and garden beyond, the park as far as I could see, were empty with a great emptiness. There were shrubs and tall trees, but I remember my firm conviction that behind none of them was the ghost hiding. He was either there or not. He was not if I did not see him. This I understood. Then instinctively, instead of returning to the house the same way, I approached the window. For some reason, I vaguely thought I should stand in the very spot where the ghost had stood. And so I did, pressed my face to the glass, and peered into the room just as he had. And in that moment, as if to show me exactly the distance he had maintained, Mrs. Groose entered from the hall, just as I had done earlier. And then I gained a full understanding of what had occurred. She saw me just as I had seen the stranger. Like me, she stopped at once. I had shocked her just as I myself had been shocked. She turned quite pale, which made me wonder, had I turned just as pale? In short, she both looked as I had and retreated in my footsteps, and I knew she had left the room and was coming round the house to me. And now I was to meet her. I remained where I was, and while I waited for her, I had time to think of many things. But I will mention only one. I want to know, why was she frightened? Oh, I found that out from her soon, very soon, as soon as she came back into view, having rounded the corner. My goodness, what's wrong with you? She was flushed and out of breath. I stayed silent until she came closer. With me, my face must have looked strange. Is there something noticeable about me? You're white as a sheet. It's dreadful to look at. I thought to myself, now, without any qualms, I won't back down from any degree of her innocence. The burden of respect for Mrs. Groose's simplicity silently slipped from my shoulders, and if I hesitated for a moment, it was certainly not because of what I had kept to myself. I held out my hand to her, and she took it. For a second, I squeezed it tightly. I was relieved she was here, close by. In her timid, agitated astonishment, there was still some kind of support. You've come, of course, to call me to church, but I can't go. Has something happened? Yes. Now you must know it too. That I look very strange. Through the window? Dreadful. So, I said, I was frightened. Mrs. Groose's eyes clearly expressed both a reluctance to be frightened and the fact that she knows her place too well, and is therefore ready to share any obvious unpleasantness with me. Oh, it was firmly decided that she would share it. What you saw from the dining room window is similar to what I saw a minute ago, but my vision was much worse. Her hand squeezed even tighter. What was it? Some stranger. He was peering in the window. What kind of man? I have no idea. Mrs. Groose looked carefully all around. So, where did he go? I don't know that either. Have you seen him before? Yes, once. On the old tower. She only looked at me more intently. Do you think he was a stranger? Well, of course. And yet you told me nothing? No, there were reasons. But now, since you've already guessed, Mrs. Groose's round eyes reflected my suspicion. Oh, no, I haven't guessed, she said very simply. How could I, when even you couldn't? Not in the slightest. You haven't seen him anywhere else except on the tower? And just now on this very spot. Mrs. Groose looked around again. What was he doing on the tower? Just stood there and looked down at me. She thought for a moment. Was he a gentleman? Here I didn't even think. No. She looked at me even more surprised. Then maybe someone from around here? From the village? No, not from here, not from here. I didn't tell you, but I checked. She sighed with vague relief. Strange as it was, it seemed much better to her. But that still proved nothing. But if he's not a gentleman, I turned and saw Flora, whom I had left in the nursery just 10 minutes before, with a clean sheet of paper, a pencil, and a copybook of round S. Now she stood in the open doorway, expressing in her own childish way a complete detachment from tiresome lessons. But she looked at me with that bright gaze which said, only a budding attachment to my person made her follow in my footsteps. I needed nothing more to feel the full force of Mrs. Groose's comparison, and, clasping my pupil in my arms, I covered her little face with kisses in which one could hear the echo of sobs, redeeming my guilt. However, for the rest of the day, I sought an opportunity to speak with my friend, especially because by evening it began to seem she was avoiding me. I remember how I intercepted her on the stairs. We descended together, and at the foot I stopped her, placing a hand on her shoulder. What you told me today at noon, I take as a statement that you never knew of anything bad in the boy. Mrs. Groose threw back her head. This time she was clearly and carefully playing some part. That I never knew of any such thing. No, I can't vouch for that. I grew agitated again. So you didn't know? Yes, miss, thank God. After thinking, I agreed with her. You mean that if a boy never... Then he's no boy at all, to my mind. I embraced her more tightly. You prefer it when boys are prone to mischief. And not to fall behind, I quickly added, so do I. But not to such a degree as to corrupt others. Corrupt? My strong word did not reach her. I explained. To spoil. She stared at me intently, trying to understand, but my words provoked an inappropriate, incomprehensible laugh from her. Are you afraid he might spoil you too? She asked this with such wonderful, frank humor that I too laughed, not too wisely, and for a time backed off, afraid of appearing ridiculous. But the next day, before the carriage was brought round, I tried to find out about something else. And what was the person like who lived here before me? The former governess? She too was young and pretty, almost like you, miss. Ah, in that case I hope her youth and beauty helped her. I blurted out involuntarily. It seems he likes us young and pretty. Oh, indeed he did, confirmed Mrs. Groose. That's what he liked about all of them. But, having said it, she immediately caught herself. I mean, miss, that was his lordship's way. I was taken aback. But of whom were you speaking first? Her expression showed nothing, but she blushed. Of him, of course. Of his lordship? Who else could it be? Nothing else could be meant here, and the impression that she had misspoken faded. I only asked what I wanted to know. And did she ever notice anything in the boy? Anything bad? She never told me anything. I felt a pang of conscience, but overcame it. Was she caring attentive? Mrs. Groose pondered, as if wanting to answer conscientiously. In some respects, yes, but not in all. She pondered again. What can I tell you, miss? She is no more. I won't gossip. I understand. I hastened to reply, but a moment later decided to continue despite this caveat. Did she die here? No, she left. I don't know what exactly in the brevity of her answers struck me as ambiguous. Left to die. Mrs. Groose looked out the window, but it seemed to me I had the right to know what behavior was expected of a young lady at Bly. You mean she fell ill and went home? She wasn't ill in our house. Nothing of the sort was noticeable. She left at the end of the year to rest at home for a short while, or so she said herself, and of course she had the right, after serving so long. We had a young woman here then, the former nursemaid who stayed on, a good, capable girl, and we put her in charge of the children for that time. And our miss never returned, and just when we were expecting her, I learned from his lordship that she had died. I pondered her words. But of what? He didn't tell me. Forgive me, miss, I must go and work. Mrs. Groose looked around once more. Her gaze lingered on the darkening distance. Then, mustering her courage, she turned back to me with an unexpected inconsistency. It's time you're going to church. I cannot bring myself to go to church. But wouldn't it help you? It wouldn't help them. I nodded toward the house. The children, I cannot leave them now. Are you afraid? I answered resolutely. Yes, I'm afraid of him. At this, a distant, faint glimmer of clear understanding appeared for the first time on Mrs. Groose's broad face. I discerned on it the belated light of some thought which I had not imparted to her, and which was still obscure to me. I recall feeling as if something had been transmitted to me from her, and that it was connected with her recently expressed desire to know more. When was it on the tower? In the middle of the month. At this very hour. Almost dark? Asked Mrs. Groose. Oh, no, it was quite light. I saw him as I see you now. But how did he get up there? And how did he get down? I smiled. I had no chance to ask him. You see, tonight he did not manage to get in, I continued. He was only looking in at the window. I hope that's all there was to it. Here she released my hand and turned slightly away. I waited a moment, then said decisively, You go to church. Good luck to you. I must watch over them. She slowly turned back to me. You're afraid for them? We exchanged another long look. Are you? Instead of answering, she moved closer to the window and pressed her face to the glass for a moment. You're seeing what he saw, I said meanwhile. She did not move. How long did he stay here? Until I came out. I rushed out to meet him. Mrs. Groose finally turned around, and her face expressed all the rest. I couldn't have done that, nor could I. I smiled again. But I did go out. I know my duty, and I know mine, she retorted, then added, What does he look like? I would give anything to tell you, but he doesn't look like anyone. Like no one, she echoed. He had no hat, and, seeing from her face that in this alone she already saw the beginning of a portrait and was even more alarmed, I quickly began adding feature after feature. He has red hair, very red, and short, crisp curls, and a long, pale face with regular, handsome features and short whiskers of an unusual shape, as red as his hair. His eyebrows, however, are darker, strongly arched, and seem very mobile. His eyes are sharp, strange, very strange. I remember clearly only that they are rather small and have a very fixed gaze. His mouth is wide, his lips thin, and aside from the short whiskers, his face is clean-shaven. I have the impression there was something actor-like about him. Actor-like? It would have been impossible to look less like an actress than Mrs. Groose did at that moment. I've never seen an actor, but that's how I imagine them. He's tall, agile, stand very straight, but by no means a gentleman. I continued. My companion's face whitened at these words, her round eyes fixed, and her soft mouth fell open. A gentleman, she gasped, bewildered and troubled. Him a gentleman? Then you know him. She was visibly struggling to keep her composure. And is he handsome? I saw how to help her. Remarkably handsome. And dressed. In clothes not his own. They are smart, but not his own. A smothered, confirming groan escaped her. They're the master's. I seized upon it. So you do know him? Quint, she exclaimed. Quint, Peter Quint, his personal servant, his valet, when he was here, when his lordship was here, meeting my gaze and ceaselessly marveling. Mrs. Groose pieced it all together. He never wore the master's hats, but, well, there were some waistcoats missing. They were both here last year. Then his lordship left, and Quint stayed on alone. I listened but stopped her for a moment. Alone, alone with us. Then, as if from the deepest depths, she added, in charge. And what became of him? She hesitated so long that I grew even more perplexed. He too, she finally uttered, went away somewhere. Here her face became most strange. God knows where he is. He's dead, dead. I almost cried out. She seemed to draw herself up morally, to strengthen herself morally, to put into words what was supernatural in it. Yes, Mr. Quint is dead. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of this story. The full version of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw will be available here on the channel. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.